Right. I have my sheet with all the fantastic information. So I would love to introduce you to Dr. Laura Mattia. She currently serves as a Senior Vice President and Financial Advisor at the Wealth Enhancement Group. She has various very impressive degrees, and she spent her career supporting and empowering women through financial education. She has been providing financial workshops and speaking at conferences for 20 years. He has been doing lots of academic research and publishing a lot of scientific articles on the subjects of women in finance, including publishing a book, Gender on Wall Street. Unfortunately, we haven't published it. It's all powered with Macmillan. And she also has a podcast. So with such an impressive resume, I'm just super honored to have Laura here giving us this workshop exclusively for us at Hachette. And if we were all in the room here, I would ask everyone to give Laura a round of applause, but we're not here like in person, only online. So I can only say, Laura, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Wonderful introduction. So, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. Growing up, my parents had strong opinions about money. They told me that money was unimportant, it was boring, it was evil. They told me that people who worked with money are not talented and don't have any other skills to do anything else. And they told me that people who understand how money works have power. And on that last point, they were absolutely right. It's not a bad thing, however. Money is a very powerful tool. And because we can use it for good and for actually making a difference in our personal lives, in our families' lives, as well as in our communities and overall society. So, understanding it is really important. But my story, actually, I tell it on a TEDx, and I think it's actually worth telling because really my foray into understanding how powerful money is and how it can really help you was when I was 17 years old. Um, my father had been unemployed for quite some time, and he had finally landed a job after being unemployed, and it required him to move 500 miles away. We were in the New York area, and he was asked to move to the Boston area. And what they decided was they were going to leave me behind because I had just been accepted into a university in the state, and they said, "Well, you're going to get in-state tuition, so you stay there." Um, well, it turned out that that's not exactly how it all worked. The thing is, my parents always wanted me to go to university, but they didn't have the money to send me there. All my childhood, my parents had really big problems around money. And you have to wonder, is it really, with the mindset of money being evil and boring, how could they have expected to have any money? So they left me without money. And, I waitressed. I actually taught dance lessons at a local dance studio and, um, struggled to the point where I actually had to tell my roommates that I was moving out. And I lived out of my car for a period of time. And yet that went on for really until I graduated. And I met a man who I liked a lot, and he asked me to marry him. And I did. And, I married him. I mean, I liked him. He was a good person, but I was way too young to get married. And if I really had to admit it, and I've really started to admitted to even myself, which has been a problem. I married him for security. I did not feel like I had power, agency, or the ability to do anything. And all of that is it real in retrospect really really sad. And um unfortunately I see a lot of women that are in this position of feeling powerless or not able to handle their money. And so my mission in life has been around helping women with money. So I'd like to start out with a little bit of a quiz, if you um, don't mind. It's kind of a little bit informational, and I'm wondering how you do. So if we were in person, we would actually discuss it more. But True or false? Women are less financially knowledgeable and confident than men. Hopefully, you know that women are less financially knowledgeable. It's been proven empirically. Large data sets, of course, not individual people. You might feel like you are financially knowledgeable, but when you look at large numbers, it's not the case. What percentage of women are comfortable with their knowledge about investing? Only 24% in the surveys that we've seen. And that's really, 1 out of 4 women. What percentage of women admit they worry about finances keeping them up at night at least once a month? A large percentage, 40%. And so you can see the pattern. Women are feeling, as I did, vulnerable and dependent. What percentage of women would rather talk about their own debt than money? 61%. Can you imagine? Uh, the mean age a wife becomes a widow, unfortunately, it's rather low, 59. And when you think about that, women on average live to age 85. That's their life expectancy. So they can live for a significant amount of time as a widow, having to control their own finances, yet without the financial knowledge and ability to do that. Um, Half of the women over age 65 live blank more years after the husband dies. Well, I just said it. 15 more years. Um, True or false, women who were once married feel less secure about financial matters once they are no longer with their spouse? And the answer is true, of course. What percentage of widows say that the hardest financial challenge in widowhood is becoming a sole decision maker? 69%. And these all come from various sources and different surveys that I've seen, and they're all a consistent message. The average um, on average, only blank percentage of widows aged 55 to 64 remarry. And this is an important component because you could say, all right, at 59, you become a widow. Well, you could remarry, but only 8% actually do remarry. And by the way, for the age group over that, 65 plus, it drops down to 2%. So perhaps that's not the answer either. Um, and in a study, like percentage of divorced women, we're shifting gear a little because there are also women that were once married and now are no longer married, um, have found that there are secret accounts after their marriage ends. Well, the answer is 77%. A large number of women find out that there's things going on that they were unaware of during their marriage. And true or false, in a philanthropic household, in other words, the couple wants to give money to charity, charitable gifts tend to go to the husband's preference, and the answer is true. And we even see this in households where the wife is the primary breadwinner, which is sad because maybe the woman has her specific ideas on where she would like to channel her money. And so when we look at all of this survey, these different surveys and this different data, we see that there is absolutely a problem. I've done a lot of research myself, and one of the studies that I worked on, we looked at financial knowledge across cohorts because we said, well, surely it can't be the younger women. It's just the older women who just, have these stereotypical ideas of how women should behave. But what we saw with we had a special tool, a survey that we did, testing different age groups. We saw that, and the survey was the whole. If we graded it, it was up to 100%. And so, um, if we saw people were around the 70%, it was only in that mid uh, period of life where people seem to become a little bit more knowledgeable. But the younger folks and the older folks, not as much. And men were in every age group more knowledgeable than women. Um, of course, we used scientific methodologies using regressions, comparing identical type of people, culling through all that. And what we found was the never married individuals, the ones that just chose never to get married, both in men and women in all the cohorts were equally less knowledgeable. I mean, let's face it, anybody with a score of lower than 60%, I'm a professor, that's not good, did not score well on this tool, this exam. Um, but all of them were less knowledgeable. When we looked at the married cohorts, however, we saw in each demographic, from Gen Y through to the pre-baby boomers, all of the women were less knowledgeable than the men, and it was significant, and that is a problem. And so we dug into a lot of the details on why this is the case. And there's a lot of theory that I could bore you with, but won't bore you. But it is a little bit tied to this whole idea that when you think about it, oftentimes, especially if women choose to have careers and do a lot of things, have a family, have a career, do it all, it's really hard to do it all. And so you start thinking about, what can I delegate to my spouse? And oftentimes, financial matters become one of those key things that we think we can delegate to. Unfortunately, it leaves us exposed. It leaves us vulnerable because, again, we're not exercising that muscle of learning how to work with money. And if in fact we become divorced or widowed, which the likelihood is very high, that at some point we're going to be living on our own, we haven't developed that skill set. So I said delegate the mowing the lawn and more other things that you could hire out, but don't delegate this very, very important activity. So what I want to do today is, first of all, inspire you. Hopefully, even just looking at those numbers, inspire you to engage with money. I want to encourage you to align your values and your goals with how you spend your money, as well as your time. I want to urge you to make a personal, comprehensive type of plan around your overall spending, your investing, and your gifting. And I want to applaud you for attending this little workshop today, because at least you're taking the steps to becoming more financially empowered and engaged, which is so, so very important. Um, I do want to say, so I do have one book published. I have a second book that is in the process of, I started it 10 years ago. It includes these 5 modules in the book that I think are all really very important. The idea of the book is to help women think through all the key financial matters that they should be thinking about in terms of planning and doing some comprehensive work. I plucked out what I consider the 10 top things that I wanted to talk about to you today, and narrowed it down into these 10 top steps. And so I'd like to go through that. And the first step starts with the discussion around aligning values with goals, because while I can talk about the technical aspects of money, which is great, there's the emotional component too, and we can't ignore the emotional components in our lives. It's very important for us to understand what money means to us and why we want to focus on money, um, to help us live our lives. So, keeping in mind that every decision that we make has to include that technical idea, but also what makes us feel more comfortable is really important. I usually, in any kind of in-person workshop that we do, we'll take a moment to help women walk through those top values that drive them, that motivate them, because it's really, really important in getting those straight. I highly recommend anybody spending time looking at what their motivators are in their life and identifying goals, not just around money, but even around the time that we spend. I'm going to tell you that that is really, because I got into strategic planning and identifying values in the corporate world many, many years ago. I learned how to apply that to my personal life, and I would not have gotten an MBA and a PhD and all the, published books and those types of things if I had not done it in a strategic fashion of identifying values and goals. So I'm sorry that I'm breezing through this idea, but I really would, want to encourage you to explore that in terms of what motivates you, because then you start actually identifying those places where you put your time and resources on in terms of growth, and you find yourself going in a direction that really does enhance your life. That whole idea of taking those values, what your life purpose is, creating goals around them, and actually spending your money and your time specifically on them. So again, just going through it really quickly, but it's a whole area that I would love for you to think about exploring. The second thing that I find a lot of people come to me about and want to talk about is the idea of retirement, considered one of the top goals that people have during their working years is, someday I want to retire. And retirement, of course, is a big decision and it requires a lot of things. Oftentimes, I don't start with talking about how ready are you from a financial standpoint. I really want to understand, are you ready from more of a psychological standpoint? Because the science and the studies have shown that a successful retirement really is dependent upon a lot of um, more softer factors. Now, Steptoe is actually from the University of London, who's published a lot of work around investing in happiness, around how your overall well-being, and he breaks it up into effective well-being and something called eudaimonic well-being, which has to do with having a purpose in life, feeling useful, feeling like what you do matters, having relationships fostered are all really important to your overall well-being. And also health, of course, taking care of your health, not smoking, not drinking too much, eating good food, that type of thing. But those things have been studied over and over again. There have been a variety of studies done in the UK. There have been a variety of studies done actually across different countries. There's one study in particular that was done over 9 years in 11 different countries that showed real physical impact on things like people's respiratory functioning and their instances of having strokes and those types of things. And so I think, the right place to start is, first of all, are you achieving this overall feeling of well-being in your current work? So career satisfaction is really important. If you are satisfied in your job, then you might want to think twice about retirement. There are a lot of people that I know will come to me and they'll say, I think it's time to retire. They say at this point, I'm 64, I'm 65, I'm 60, whatever age. And everybody says I should retire. And I always want to step back and say, well, do you want to retire? Why do you want to retire? Are you retiring to something, not just away from something? Is there something that's exciting you about your future? So we talk a lot about that. We talk about what your opportunity cost is if you don't retire. Well, you know what? I have family all over the country, in other countries, in different places that I'd like to travel and visit. And I can't do that while I'm retiring. I mean, there's trade-offs, but really understanding what you're retiring to, because I'm going to tell you, I've met people that have retired and I see them a year later and they're not in a good place because they don't have a reason to get up in the morning and click their heels and say it's a great day. So really want to, understand what retirement's going to look like. And then in addition to that, defining that in a way that you start coming up with your goals in retirement. What is your expectation around your lifestyle? Is it going to be similar or is it going to be different? Are you thinking about downsizing? Are you thinking about traveling? What are you thinking about doing in your retirement? And how will that drive your expenses, what you need in retirement. I know that there are a lot of, the pension, they came in talking about your pension earlier. I think Margaret was telling me, I mean, everybody has different needs in retirement. It's really hard to tell you what you need in retirement without understanding your expectation. I can tell you that I have met people who have retired and just lived off of what the government gave them, and they were fine. And then I have other people who would never have been fine if they were just living off of the government pension. So really important to think about what your lifestyle would want to be. I mean, the truth of the matter is that if you retire at 65 or 60, it is very possible that you could live a real long time in retirement. I mean, people are living to 100 all the time these days, right? So if you retire at 65, you could wind up living in retirement for 35 years. So it's important to think about what that's going to look like. In terms of the averages, the tables tell us that men on average live to 82, women on average live to 85. Although I really hate averages, averages are very deceiving. There's a little anecdote that they say that if you put your hand in a bowl of ice and you put your other hand in the oven, on average, your temperature is just fine, but you're going to be pretty darn miserable. And so average is usually not the best way to go. I like to look at probabilities, and what they have shown us is that the probability of living longer is pretty great. If you look at the orange line here, because I think I'm talking mostly to ladies, um, the for somebody that's currently age 65, they have a 73% chance of living to age 85. They have a 53% chance of living to 90. What's also interesting here as well, though, if you are married and part of a couple, and it does matter in terms of overall planning, you have a 73% probability of one of you living to age 90, which is pretty strong as well. So, thinking about what your probability of living longer is important. Of course, what matters too is your own individual, personal life expectancy. So, how is your current health? How is your family's health? What I have read in the different things that I've looked at is that you should expect to live 3 to 5 years longer than your oldest um, parent or grandparent. So keeping that in mind, if your grandparent lived to age 100, well, you might have an ability to live way past that. So how do you want to plan for that? I would say that you might want to have a little bit of a stronger pension if you think that you're going to live that long as well. Um, oh, and this just shows if you are in a same-sex marriage, what the probability here, it jumps to 78% that both of you would live to uh, age 90. Now, I don't have a lot of detail around your healthcare costs over in the UK, but I can tell you that healthcare costs are skyrocketing everywhere. Um, when we think about high costs in terms of the UK, of course, the NHS is going to continue to support you. That is one of the things that we love about the way the UK operates is that you have this strong healthcare system. But there are significant backlogs, and especially after COVID, that is creating problems for people. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that. There are rising costs in the services that the National Health Care Services doesn't provide as well that you have to keep in mind. There's limited coverage around long-term care. I was actually surprised when I started doing the research to understand what the national program covers. It covers a lot more around long-term care than the United States Medicare service provides, but it doesn't cover everything still. So That's important to know. And I would urge you to look into understanding what coverage it does provide because there's still exposure there. And then a lot of people will opt for private insurance because of the long wait times, the backlogs, and so forth. Um, but you need to know that those costs are increasing. Um, I did some research to try to find out a little bit about what organizations can help provide some additional understanding of what your services are in retirement. And there's an organization called Beacon that uh, it's the only one. I'm not sure if it's ideal, but I do know that they're independent to the National Health Service. So it could be a place to start to really understanding what costs, what you need. Because in my mind, healthcare costs, your own health and the cost to maintain it is possibly your biggest area of uncertainty that you want to cover in retirement. And so that would be a driver for why I might want more money in retirement, a bigger nest egg, and a bigger pension pot. Um, Want to talk a little bit about saving, not just for retirement, but also for short-term and emergency needs. And the biggest reason why I want to talk about it is because there are these differences between saving and investing, and then there's common features. But when I get a phone call from a journalist last month, so if you remember in April of last month, um, we had a lot of volatility in the markets, particularly in the US, because of our administration and all the craziness that was going on around that. And at one point, the US stock market was down significantly. And I got a call from a journalist, and they were asking me about, well, what if somebody had money in the stock market and they needed the money to put down on a house? The next month, and it's locked up in the stock market and it declined. And I just was dumbfounded by that question because I wanted to ask, what was that money doing in the stock market? It had no business being in the stock market. If you have short-term needs, a house purchase, a wedding, your educational costs, whatever they might be, that money should not be invested in the stock market. Investing in the stock market is a long-term proposition. For short-term money, it should be in something very, very safe. In the US, we often recommend money markets and treasuries and maybe even CDs. I'm not sure exactly what tools to recommend for you in the UK, but I want to urge you to look for the tools that have guarantees that they're going to safeguard your money. Yeah, they're not going to make a great return. That's just a trade-off that you're going to make, but you want the guarantee that that money is going to be there at the time that you need it. And that includes your emergency savings. Now, the reason why that's the case is that when you invest in the markets, you are investing for the long term, and there's this whole idea of the time value of money and what happens with money when you invest it. And I'm sorry, I don't have a pound sterling here. I have a US dollar, but it's the same concepts as you know. Um, the question is a US dollar or a pound sterling worth today what it would be worth next year? Well, um, I used to work for M&M Mars and back in the 90s, and I'm going to tell you that a bag of peanut M&Ms in the US is worth currently $1.50. If I go out to buy it, in any of the markets, it's $1.50. But when I was working there, it was only 50 cents. And so peanut M&Ms, and by the way, I actually did the research to see there was no shrinkage in the bag. So that's good. At least they've kept the same amount of chocolate in their packaging, but we still see this inflationary price in the price of an M&M. And so clearly, if it costs more money to buy goods and services today than it did in 1990. A pound sterling or a dollar is not worth the same today as it will be next year. And that's something to consider. And so when we look at an investment table, and this is, let me just explain to you what I did here. This is just an Excel spreadsheet that I plugged into if I had $100,000 US dollars, but you can change it into pound sterling, it doesn't matter. And it grew by 2%, 5%, 8%. And let's just look at the extreme sides, the 2% versus the 5%. If you put it into an investment, in a safe investment where it only made 2%, you would have next year 102,000 pounds sterling. But if you put into something that grew 8%, it might have $108,000 if it grew by 8%. And of course, that 8% is a lot less guaranteed. It's a lot, it could be 8%, but there's a lot more of a range. If anybody knows statistics, the standard deviation around that over 8% it's not guaranteed. Um, and so forth throughout this piece. The guarantees on the 2%, you can get a 2% return fairly easily these days on a guaranteed product where you can't get 8%. And so my question for you is, even in the first 5 years, if you have a short-term need that you absolutely need that money in the short term, why are you going to put it in that 8% potential that you don't know if you're going to have it if you really need that money? I would say it's not worth it. I mean, to get an extra $6,000 or 6,000 sterling, pound sterling in the first year, it's not worth the risk that you're exposing it to. And this is the type of thing that people don't talk about. They don't talk about it on television or any place because this is boring, but this is very, very practical. And if you don't get at least anything from this presentation, I hope that you walk away with an understanding of risk and when it's appropriate to take risk and when it's not. And I would say that in the first 5 years, okay, even the fifth year, 110,000 versus 146,000. Now it's starting to get a little bit more material. Yeah, 10 years is definitely material. 121,000 versus 215,000. And I actually plotted this for you so you can see what's happening here. So in the first 5 years, the compounding of that greater return is not material enough that it should compel you to put it in risky assets. That's when you should want to just put it in more of a guarantee. Yes, over time, the compounding effect of the risky assets start becoming material. So, when we see the exponential growth of the overall 8% investment, now it's starting to make sense to invest. So for your retirement money, especially if you're young, yes, put it in risky assets. But if you're older and you're going to start needing to take distributions out of your investments, or if you need it for short-term types of goals, don't put it in risky assets. So I think I said enough about that. On the converse, I just wanted to show you what compounding can do for you, again at 8%. And what I did was, again, on an Excel spreadsheet, I said, okay, I have these two young ladies who are investing. The first one invests $7,000, and I chose $7,000 because of a US related incentive that makes sense. But if you think about it, 7,000 is, less than 500 per month, whether it's dollars or pound sterling. And I said, okay, that 7,000 is going to compound at 8% because it's going to be invested in a risky asset because we have longevity on our side. We want this is going towards retirement, and I'm not going to start accessing this money until I'm 65. Well, if she did it for the first 10 years and then stopped, and just allowed it to continue to compound and grow over those remaining years, she could wind up with 1.6 million at the end of by the time she's 65. And so a big number, a very healthy type of pension that she would have. Whereas if Jocelyn said, no, I'm not going to invest in the first 10 years. I'm just going to live it up and spend money as I want. And I'm not going to start investing till I'm 31. Even if she invested for the next 35 years, remember, the first one only invested for the first 10, and now Jocelyn's investing for 35 years, the 7,000. So she's going to invest for a lot longer time, a lot more money. She still would not, the compounding effect, she didn't have those initial years of that compounding effect to grow. Because notice, I mean, um, the first one already had 109,000 invested at age 30. She had nothing. And, um, you know, the first one actually wound up with more money. And so compounding is a beautiful thing. It's magic. And it's because the money is making, even the compounded money, the interest is also making money on top of itself, where it starts snowballing and growing on an exponential level. And so if you're young, or if you have a younger daughter or son, you want to encourage them to start investing as early as possible for their pension. Um, I also wanted to say something about emergency savings, because emergencies happen. They happen all the time. For somebody to come and say to me, oh no, I didn't know I was going to have an emergency, is always another um, incredulous thing to me, because whether, I don't care what it is, whether it's a flat tire or a broken washing machine, or something's going to happen in your life. And there was a study done that actually showed that 9 in 10 people will experience a spike in their 12-month spending, but that on average, most of them, 2 out of 3 of them, could not actually serve that, did not have the money to pay for that emergency. And this particular study looked at where they sourced their money from, and they sourced it from 3 different sources. Either they increased credit card debt, which is always a bad answer, or they took money from their retirement plan, also a bad answer, or they stopped contributing. None of them really an ideal answer. So rather than doing that, if you have emergency savings ready and available to you for that flat tire or that emergency, you would be a lot better off. So I'm not going to necessarily tell you how much money you should have for emergency savings. I think that it's a very personalized thing. Some people have access to places they could get money, whether they're able to get a home loan credit or some other type of thing. But the textbook answer is somewhere between 3 months and 6 months of your income. But it really does depend upon also, are you living in an older home? Are you living in a newer home? There are a lot of things that could be factored into how much money you should have for emergency savings, but everybody should have some kind of emergency savings. And so emergency funds are important. Understand that compound interest works primarily over the long run. So that's when you want to take advantage of it. And risk only makes sense over the long run. Again, so keeping out of the risky assets if you have short-term needs. And it's all about having discipline. I always tell people when I help them with investing that it's my job to figure out what size roller coaster I can put them on. Because once the roller coaster starts moving, I don't want them to jump off. If they have long-term goals and they have the ability to sit in a risky asset and experience the volatility of the ride, then great, we can put them on a large roller coaster. But if you can't tolerate risk for any reason and stay disciplined and invested, you should go on a smaller roller coaster, one that doesn't have as risky of investments. Um, so I'm starting to, I think, probably run out of time here, so I want to go through some of this quickly, but getting out of debt, staying out of debt, really, really important. When I show people this, they're always surprised to see that, if you, this is a little story, if you see a pocketbook that's on sale and you use your credit card, it's not usually a good answer. In the United States, the average APR is 22.6% APR. The UK, from what I've read, it's higher. Um, and if you pay off the minimum payments, it's going to take you 9 years to pay it off. And you're going to wind up paying $3,700 in interest expenses, making the pocketbook even more expensive than it would have been. And what I saw in 2025, that they were saying that the average rate, could it be this high, 35%? I mean, that should be against the law. But credit cards are not good answers, and I highly recommend that you do not use a credit card. If you are in debt, you can do something around potentially trying to negotiate with lenders and consolidating that debt and having a strategy around how you approach it. And the two strategies that are often talked about are this debt snowball, or where you're attacking the lowest balances first. This is the type of strategy you want to take if you don't have good discipline and you want to be able to check off the box saying, yeah, I achieved that. Or the debt avalanche, where you're approaching the higher interest rate, really is the best way. I'm going to go past that. I'm going to actually go past monitoring your financial statements, but your financial statements are a budget type of statement. We call it a cash flow, a profit and loss statement, a budget, or a spending plan. I don't care what you call it, but understanding where your money's coming in from and where it's going is really important in terms of getting a handle on your money and how much you can potentially even save. A really important tool. When you go through the exercise, it's not just about the actual bottom line number. It's about going through the exercise and understanding how you're spending your money. I find that always people find that they are surprised on how much money they're spending on things that maybe don't align with their personal values and goals as much as they thought, and that they might want to try to divert some of that money. So recommend that. Also monitoring your overall um, net worth and how much you're saving, really, really important. I want to kind of blow through that whole conversation, and I'm sorry, but I think I want to get and be able to answer some questions. Um, uh, I Yeah, this is a chart that's probably very consistent with the conversation that you had around how much money you should have in your pension. And they say, oh, at age 30, you should have your salary saved. At age 40, you should have 3 times your salary saved, and so forth. By the time you're retired, you should have 10 times your salary saved. And this is based upon a whole lot of assumptions. It's based upon, again, what they're assuming about your life expectancy and everything else. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. I don't really like these benchmarks because it really does depend, but you can see they're fairly large numbers. And so the idea is, if we can encourage you to even save a little bit towards that goal. There are things that you can do in retirement. Oftentimes, you're just not spending as much in retirement as you did in your working years because you're no longer paying for the commute. Possibly, hopefully, you've paid off a mortgage and now you're living in a home rent free. Um, you're not paying as much for dry cleaning or those types of things. You're not paying for taxes. So there are things that indicate that maybe you really only need, in terms of income, somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80% of the money that you needed when you were working. But you want to take a look at that. Want to talk a moment about investing. First of all, the idea that people react very strongly to the headline news in the market. And, when everything's really going well, people tend to be irrationally exuberant, and they want, to, go, go, go and invest in risky assets. And then all of a sudden, when things go a little volatile, they run to the hills and they sell at the wrong times. And want to encourage you not to do that. If you're invested in good, solid, investment grade types of investments, you want to stay invested even through the rocky times. Um, I'm passing through all this because I want to mention the studies that I see, because I was saying how women tend to be less financial knowledgeable and less not financially confident. However, the studies also show that women tend to be better investors. So when women do invest, and the first really great study that was done back about 24 years ago was done by these two professors, Terence Barber and Terence O'Dean, and I forget Barbara's first name. They did a great study. They used a database from one of the big wirehouses, and they found that women actually did better than men. And the reason behind that, I have this gentleman driving a car. If you think about car driving, for example, a lot of times men will say they're better drivers. And the studies actually come out that say men are better drivers. But if you look at the amount of insurance that men have to pay for their cars and the number of accidents that men get versus the number of accidents women get, I would say to you, well, maybe men aren't better drivers because men get in more accidents and the cost of their insurance is higher because they get in more accidents. And so if the measurement of being a better driver is getting from point A to point B safer and in one piece, I would say that maybe women are better drivers. Well, it's the same thing with investing. What they found with investing is that because men have more overconfidence and tend to trade more, they tend to create more churn in their portfolios, creating more problems in their portfolios, where women are much more disciplined. So I want to encourage you to take advantage of the idea that you are a more disciplined type of investor, and to consider learning more about the strategies around investing. Because the whole idea when they talk about diversification stems back to investment theory, where it has been shown that when you put two investments that are do have different behavior, you can smooth out the performance of that overall portfolio. And so I have this little example of just talking about if you owned a little concession stand in a farmer's market and you were selling sunglasses, and um, on sunny days people bought your sunglasses, but on rainy days nobody bought your sunglasses. What would be a great way for you to ensure that you could cover the cost of your concession booth? Well, why not trade in some of those sunglasses for umbrellas? And so you have sunglasses for the sunny days, you have umbrellas for the rainy days, and it's an all-weather strategy where you have um, an asset that will satisfy in every environment. It's the same type of concept. And so the power of diversification is really, really strong. I just want to show you, for example, this little uh, kind of idea. If you had two investments here, and I just showed you after the 2 year investment, which one would you rather invest? You would probably say, oh, investment A. But if I showed you that A was much more volatile, it went up by 50%, but down by 26% the following year, and B did a little bit, was a little less volatile. And by the way, if you notice, they're negatively correlated. When A is up, B is down. When A is down, B is up. You might second guess your choice in A. And so what I did was I plotted A, and with its 12% return, it had $111,000 at the end of the 2 years. B, with a lower average return, had more dollars, and the AB combination had the most dollars. And so, you know, the idea here is that uh, this negative correlation and this ability to diversify will actually wind up with more money at the end of the investing period. Um, Wanted to show you that when it comes to the United States versus the rest of the world, um, they both are risky. So we use standard deviation as our measurement. You can see that um, both are risky assets, but a diversified portfolio is between the United States and the rest is um, even less risky. And just to give you this pictorially, um, a a combined investment of US and non-US investments is less risky if we measure it by standard deviation than either investing in all US or all non-US. So just want to encourage you to get in more knowledgeable about the idea around diversification, because the rest of my story does end up where I wound up getting my marriage was not good. My first marriage, I finally just realized that my husband couldn't keep a job himself, and we wound up financially distressed. And I was like, okay, I married him for financial security, and he wasn't able to provide that for me. And that's when I decided to go back to school, and I got an MBA in finance to understand money. And it really has helped me. I wound up getting a PhD and so forth. I really want to encourage you to learn and understand more about how money works. It is not that hard. Get those buzzwords and the vernacular out of your education, because at the end of the day, I could explain to you standard deviation just means volatility, the amount it bounces. Um, you don't need to understand the level that some people want to try to communicate to you either. You don't need to know how options work or, crazy derivatives. You just need to understand your own money. But, taking that decision to start understanding and investing, if you can kind of walk away with that, that would make me very happy. So, thank you so much for hearing this. I'm sorry, I always get inspired to show you more than I can show you. um, but my last slide here um, is most people don't plan to fail; they simply fail to plan. And I love this picture because look at the first two women, how much fun they're having versus the ones in the third seat. Encourage you to sit in this first seat. Get involved.
Thank you so much, Laura. I know we only have 3 minutes, but if there's any questions anyone would like to ask, please do raise your hand or put your camera on or type it. Of course, Laura, if you're okay, we can just run over a little bit, like 2 minutes, so we can get one or two questions
Yep.
in. Or do you want? I can start with my question, but I really would like to, because I've already done this before, so I've already asked all my questions before. So I really want you all to have a chance to ask a question. I know there's lots of information, but I think it's quite good information that you can take and run with. I actually can't see people on camera, so I don't know. Hopefully, someone will unmute themselves and going to ask questions. Oh, and there's a question in the chat, Laura, is what length of time would you consider a short-term versus long-term goal?
Well, so now you saw that chart and the way after 5 years, the growth starts becoming really exponential. So to me, that 5 year mark is really, really interesting to me. I mean, 4 years, 3 years could be, but you have to remember, like sometimes the markets can misbehave for long periods of time. And so if you really need that money, I mean, it's one thing when it's just flat and you didn't make a lot of money, but I think back, for example, at periods like the financial crisis that we had where money came down and it came down for a lengthy period of time and you don't want to be accessing it at that point. So um, I kind of like the 5 year mark as being the um, place where you might consider.
Someone asked about investing in gold.
Gold, well, so gold is a very volatile asset class. I always say a little bit of gold. So it's also negatively correlated to the markets. So because of that, it can help buoy a portfolio over times where it's not doing well. In 2022, when the US market came crashing down, our natural resources, which didn't just include gold, it included gold and silver and copper and aluminum and oil and a lot of those different things, they really sustained our portfolios. They were up over 20% when the US market was down almost 20%. I don't remember the international market, but I know it was down also, and the UK market. Um, so it's definitely a little bit, but you don't want to put everything in it because it can have long periods of stagnation and it can be very volatile.
Talking about diversifying, isn't it?
Yeah.
And another great question is any advice for installing financial literacy in young girls, women from early age? So, how can we get young women and girls interested in finances?
Well, yeah. So encouraging them, I'm hoping that some of the messaging about, first of all, realizing that you may be on your own and or you may choose to be on your own. Like even the fact that I had the agency to walk away from a marriage because it wasn't working and say, I'm going to be reliant on myself was really, really important to me because you don't want to be dependent. And unfortunately, I have seen women in situations that they've stayed in marriages because they felt so dependent, yet they were they were either emotionally abused or like all kinds of really bad situations. So it is, I mean, once you have the ability to make financial decisions, rational financial decisions, it's not just about you and your own health. It's about your family. It's about how you show up in the community, how you help society, how, I mean, it really is a tool for good. You can do a lot with it. Showing them that idea around investing early on, that idea that and it compounds, really important. One of the things I show my students, because I teach at a university down here in South Florida, is I make them calculate their coffee runs to Starbucks over a long period of time. And what if they didn't do the Starbucks and they put it in an account and I make them do it on their financial calculators. And I say, okay, there's your yacht. You make a decision. You can spend it on coffee or you can save it for your future and really have something that means something to you as opposed to the coffee.
Thank you so much. I love it. I probably should do my own calculations about spending on drinks. Right, I we don't have any more questions, and I know we're running out of time, but I have one question which I really want to ask you. Is can you please tell us today, out of all the presentation, everything what we've heard, what we should go and do almost immediately after this, so we all can have like an action point for us when we leave this workshop, so we know what we're doing and we're doing
Oh,
it right.
great. Okay. So first of all, just the commitment to taking the power into your own hands and starting to make steps. And it is a little bit like dieting, financial knowledge, by gaining a financial pot. It's, you diet, you don't eat candy or whatever, and you don't see any movement on your scale. And all of a sudden you do. It's one of those things where you just have to have the commitment and the discipline to just start little things, start trying to save and be more conscious about how you're spending your money, and making a decision. Is this what I'm spending my money on right now? Is this really bringing me joy? Is this something I really, really want? Or is, can I forego it? And because money, it's a limited resource. We only have a certain amount. But, making that commitment to yourself. I think I saw some kind of thing that shot across about debt, but and the fact that a lot of people are in debt. I didn't read the whole question, but the idea of getting out of debt as quickly as you can, um, because it's insidious. It just doesn't go away once you're in it. Making that commitment to just going through and knocking that out, that would be my focus. Gaining some overall financial health. And then, yes, starting to put a little money away for your future because it does grow, and try to be very responsible and disciplined in diversifying. Don't put it all in gold. Don't put it all in one thing. Diversify across, and yes, the UK market, but also the US market, because the US market's pretty big. So you want to invest in both. Um, Really important.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to stop recording now. Hopefully, I know how to do it. But yes, thank you ever so much for being here, for teaching us how to do it right this time. Thank you everyone who attended. I know some people dropped off now because they had other meetings. But thank you so much. If you have any more questions, please do email me and I will get in touch. We've already discussed that. I'll get in touch with Laura and I hopefully can get your answers, some answers quickly. So thank you so much, everyone, and thank you so much, Laura. It has been a pleasure, and thank you ever so much for doing it again, at least for me.
Thank you, Margaret. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye. Thanks.